The morning in Glendale was calm. The sky was a crystal clear blue, and the sidewalk outside the local coffee shop bustled with customers enjoying their morning drinks. Among them, sitting quietly at an outdoor table, was Michael Carter, a blind man who visited the shop every day. By his side stood Zeus, his loyal German shepherd, vigilant and attentive. Zeus was more than a guide dog. His firm posture and commanding presence came from years of training as a former K-9 unit. Now retired, Zeus had dedicated his life to protecting Michael, offering not just guidance, but an emotional connection that the man deeply cherished. As Michael sipped his coffee in silence, the roar of 3 motorcycles broke the peaceful atmosphere. Pulling into a spot near the cafe, the loud engines drew the attention of everyone around. 3 men dismounted, clad in leather jackets adorned with striking patches. They seemed casual, but the way they surveyed their surroundings added an edge of tension. Chuck, the leader of the group, had a commanding presence with a loud, confident laugh. He gestured animatedly while talking to his friends, asserting dominance over the space. Zeus, always alert, perked up his ears, sensing something unusual. The men began strolling between the tables, watching people as they went. Chuck noticed Zeus and Michael, pausing for a moment to stare at the German shepherd. "That's a big dog you've got there," he remarked, his tone prompting Zeus to lock eyes with him. Chuck chuckled at his own comment and leaned forward slightly as if testing the dog's reaction. Zeus stayed motionless, but there was something in his stance, a silent warning that spoke volumes about his read of the situation. Chuck, perhaps wanting to prove something, made an exaggerated gesture with his hands as if he were joking. "Is he really as smart as he looks?" he asked his friends, who laughed awkwardly. The atmosphere grew tenser. Zeus remained still, but his eyes never left Chuck. Michael, unaware of the glances around him, asked, "Is everything okay?" His voice sounded calm, but there was a hint of unease in it, as if he could sense the change in Zeus's behavior. Michael, still oblivious to what was happening, reached out to touch Zeus. "Are you okay, buddy?" he asked gently. Zeus responded by moving slightly closer to him, but his eyes never left Chuck, who was starting to feel the weight of his own actions. The atmosphere seemed to shift in the small outdoor area of the cafe. While Michael finished his coffee, Chuck and his group's laughter grew louder, now tinged with a provocative tone. Zeus remained still by Michael's side, but anyone watching closely could see he was on full alert. His muscles were tense, and his eyes followed Chuck's every move, as if anticipating something yet to come. He wasn't just a dog, he was a guardian, trained to protect at all costs. Chuck, feeling like the center of attention, approached Michael's table. He seemed completely oblivious to the fact that other patrons were watching. "You've got a nice-looking dog here, don't you?" he said, playfully, though with a faint hint of disdain. Michael gave a slight smile, trying to keep the situation light. "Thanks. Zeus is my best friend." Chuck tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Zeus, huh? Greek god's name? Let's see if he lives up to it." Before Michael could respond, Chuck made a quick move, reaching out to touch Zeus's snout. It was a gesture that might have seemed harmless to onlookers, but for Zeus, trained to detect threats, it was enough to trigger his instincts. The German shepherd didn't attack, but took a step back, letting out a low, warning growl. The tension around them thickened, and an uncomfortable silence fell over the area. "Easy there, boy," Chuck said, raising his hands as if he were only joking, but there was a glint of challenge in his eyes. Michael, still not understanding what was happening, placed his hand on Zeus's neck, trying to calm him down. "Sorry if he scared you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "So, Chuck, you're going to let a dog put you in your place?" That one sentence changed the mood. Chuck, wanting to impress, looked back at Zeus with a smile full of intent. The leader of the group looked around and noticed that many people were watching the interaction, some even discreetly filming with their phones. Maybe that made him hesitate for a brief moment, but he wasn't the type to back down. "Relax, guys, it's just a dog," he said dismissively. "Zeus, what's wrong?" he asked in a whisper. The German shepherd just kept his eyes fixed on Chuck, as if waiting for the next move. Chuck took a few steps back, but it wasn't a retreat. His friends kept laughing, egging him on with taunts, and it seemed to fuel the biker's already bruised pride. He doesn't like it when people come on too strong. Maybe that scared him. But Chuck ignored the comment. He glanced at his friends, then at the people around him, as if looking for approval for what he was about to do. With a cold smile, he took a step toward Zeus, extending his hand again. Zeus, still seated, growled low, a clear warning to anyone who knew how to read it. The sound was almost inaudible, but powerful enough to make the onlookers flinch with concern. Still, Chuck seemed determined to test the limits. "Come on, big guy," Chuck said with a forced laugh. "Are you as tough as you look?" This time, before the German shepherd could react, Chuck lightly tapped the side of Michael's chair, a move that caused Zeus to rise in one swift, firm motion. That gesture was the final straw for the animal. Zeus didn't charge, but his posture changed. He was now fully alert, his body tense like a bowstring ready to snap. The crowd around them began to murmur, and a few people raised their phones to capture the scene. Michael, sensing the change in Zeus's behavior, furrowed his brow. He ran his hand over the dog's neck, trying to calm him down, but now he knew something was wrong. "What's going on here?" he asked aloud, his expression worried.
Chuck just laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. He knew he was playing with fire, but seemed unable to back down in front of his friends and the crowd. "Nothing, really," he replied, gesturing for Michael to relax. "We're just messing around."
At that moment, a woman who had been sitting nearby stood up. "Hey, you need to stop this," she said firmly. "Leave the dog alone." Her voice echoed across the sidewalk, and for the first time Chuck hesitated. Embarrassment began to take over, and he looked around, realizing the disapproving stares. Feeling the discomfort rise, Chuck took a step back, but it wasn't to retreat for good. He had something else in mind. "Relax, we're just having fun," he said dismissively, trying to salvage what was left of his image, but inside he felt the need to assert his dominance. Zeus, on the other hand, remained still, observing every movement with surgical precision, as if reading the biker's next move. Michael tightened the leash on Zeus, murmuring, "Zeus, calm down." "What's going on?" The crowd around them seemed frozen, with a heavy silence making everything even more unsettling. Suddenly Chuck made a sudden move. He pretended to back off, but in an impulsive act, he kicked one of the nearby chairs, pushing it toward Zeus. The sound of metal hitting the ground echoed down the street, and a few people gasped in surprise. Zeus reacted instantly, stepping to the side and dodging the chair with impressive agility. The dog growled more audibly now, his protective stance becoming even more evident. It was a clear warning that he would no longer tolerate any provocation. "Hey, stop!" the woman shouted again, this time with more authority. A few other people started speaking up, asking Chuck to stop. He, however, seemed trapped in his own ego. "What's the problem? You've never seen someone play with a dog before," he said, trying to maintain a carefree attitude, but his hands were clenched, and it was clear he was no longer in control of the situation. Zeus stood firm, his eyes locked on Chuck as if analyzing every movement, ready to act if necessary. Michael finally realized something serious was happening. He slowly stood up, his hand firmly gripping Zeus's leash. "Can someone tell me what's going on here?" he asked aloud, his concern now obvious.
But before anyone could respond, Chuck stepped forward, leaning toward Michael as if trying to intimidate him directly. The crowd held its breath, and Zeus, as if understanding the threat to his owner, lowered his head slightly, preparing to defend Michael at all costs.
The tension reached its peak as Chuck took another step toward Michael. He was so close now that his presence was oppressive, even to someone who couldn't see. "What's wrong, buddy? Hiding behind your dog?" Chuck mocked with a bitter laugh that seemed to hide his own discomfort. Michael, on the other hand, remained calm, though his voice trembled slightly. "Zeus never hides me from anything," he replied, gripping the dog's leash tightly. "He's here to protect me, and it seems like he knows something I don't."
Zeus stayed still, but the growl in his throat grew louder with every passing second. The crowd around them, once hesitant, was now starting to murmur louder, clearly uncomfortable with Chuck's behavior.
An older man sitting at a nearby table finally stood up and intervened. "Hey, this has gone too far. You should leave before something bad happens."
Suddenly, the silence was broken by an unexpected sound. Zeus barked loudly, a deep and firm bark that made Chuck instinctively step back. It was a sound that couldn't be ignored, and its meaning was clear. The dog was ready to act.
The crowd reacted with surprise, some filming, others backing away. The energy shifted completely. Michael, noticing Zeus's bark, knew something serious was about to happen. "Zeus, it's okay, I'm fine," he said, trying to calm the German shepherd, but Zeus kept his eyes locked on Chuck, as if saying he didn't trust those words.
Then, in a final attempt to save his image, Chuck impulsively stepped forward, reaching out to push Michael by the shoulder. It was a quick move, but not fast enough to go unnoticed by Zeus. The German shepherd reacted in the blink of an eye, positioning himself between Chuck and Michael with a swift move that placed him directly between the biker and his owner. Zeus didn't attack, but stood firm, his teeth slightly bared, a clear warning that this needed to end right there.
The street fell into complete silence. Chuck froze, unable to react, while Zeus's gaze seemed to pierce him. Michael, now aware that something very serious had just happened, lifted his head and said firmly, "I think it's best if you leave now." The crowd around them began to murmur, this time against Chuck. He looked around, realizing he had lost control of the situation. Without saying another word, he slowly backed away, trying to hide his embarrassment. His friends followed him in silence, and within seconds, the group vanished around the corner. Zeus, by his side, stayed alert, his body still tense, but there was something more, a subtle tremor in his front paws. Michael, feeling the vibration through the leash, crouched down and touched the fur of the German shepherd. "Zeus, it's okay now, buddy," he murmured, trying to calm him down, but Zeus seemed to hesitate, his gaze still fixed on the spot where Chuck had disappeared. It was as if he knew that man wasn't just a temporary threat, but a problem that could resurface. Michael, gently touching Zeus's snout, whispered, "You feel something I don't you?" The crowd around them began to disperse slowly, but a few people stayed close, still curious. The woman who had confronted Chuck took a few steps toward Michael, a concerned look on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice still trembling with adrenaline. Michael nodded, but the furrowed brows revealed the worry inside him. "I'm fine, but Zeus, he's never reacted like this before. He knows when something's wrong, and that worries me." The woman crouched down, observing Zeus closely. "This dog, he's not ordinary, is he?"
Michael sighed, a mix of pride and melancholy on his face. No, he was a canine, trained to protect, serve, and, if necessary, sacrifice everything. But that was years ago. I thought he had left all that behind. Now he's my guide, my family.
The woman looked into Zeus's eyes as if trying to decipher something only he knew. "Maybe he never forgot who he is," she replied, almost in a whisper. The older man who had intervened earlier stepped closer. "Listen, son," he began, his voice deep and filled with wisdom. "Dogs like him have instincts that go beyond what we can understand. He didn't react like that by chance. You should trust him and maybe stay alert. That man, Chuck, he didn't seem like the type to give up easily." The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, the rumble of engines. They were no closer, but they hadn't completely disappeared either. Michael took a deep breath, stroking Zeus's head. "Maybe it's just my imagination," he thought. But the tremor in Zeus's body said otherwise. What he didn't know was that this incident was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would test not only Zeus's loyalty, but also Michael's strength to face the unexpected. The tension seemed to have finally faded, but not for Zeus. Although he was now lying next to Michael, his breathing was still faster than normal, his eyes alert to every movement around them. Sensing the dog's restlessness, Michael decided it was time to leave the cafe. He grabbed the leash and stood up slowly, offering a nervous smile to the few people still nearby. "Thanks for sticking around. I think Zeus and I need some fresh air," he said, before starting to walk down the sidewalk. The walk back home was something Michael and Zeus did every day, but that morning each step felt laden with meaning. When they arrived at Michael's small apartment, he unclipped the leash, allowing Zeus to roam freely around the space. "You're acting strange today, buddy," Michael remarked as he fumbled around the kitchen counter for Zeus's water bowl. The German Shepherd moved slowly through the apartment, sniffing every corner as if conducting an inspection. Finally, he stopped by the door, sitting quietly, but with his ears perked, listening for any sounds from outside. Michael noticed this, furrowing his brow. "What's going on, Zeus? You never do this." As Michael sat on the couch trying to process the events of the morning, he began to remember the stories he'd heard about Zeus before adopting him. He knew Zeus had a background as a canine, but he'd never learned all the details. Zeus had served in tough cases where his ability to detect danger had saved lives, and now, it seemed, those instincts were returning. "Are you trying to tell me something, boy?" Michael asked, petting the dog's soft fur. Zeus only responded with a slight wag of his tail, but his eyes never left the door. Outside, the distant rumble of a motorcycle echoed again, almost imperceptible. Zeus raised his head, his whole body tensing once more. Michael didn't hear the sound, but he felt the dog's reaction. He placed a hand on Zeus's shoulder, as he always did, to comfort him. "Whatever it is, we're in this together," he said softly. Little did Michael know that promise would be tested very soon, in a way he could never have imagined. Michael's fingers grazed Zeus's fur as he spoke, almost to himself. "Maybe I'm just overthinking this, huh, buddy?" he muttered.
Zeus's ears twitched, his sharp eyes fixed on the front door as though he anticipated something that Michael could not see. Outside, the quiet was shattered by the distant hum of engines. At first faint, it grew louder, more distinct.
Zeus immediately stood, his body rigid as he stared at the door. Michael, sensing the change, froze. "What is it, Zeus?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Moments later, a knock echoed through the apartment, sharp and deliberate. Zeus let out a low growl, positioning himself between Michael and the door. Michael hesitated before standing, his hand gripping Zeus's leash tightly. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice firm but wary. There was no immediate answer, only the sound of faint murmurs outside. Michael's pulse quickened. He could feel Zeus's tension through the leash, the dog's readiness to defend if necessary. "I'm not opening the door until you say who you are," Michael declared. Finally, a voice responded, deep and vaguely familiar. "Relax, man. It's just me, Chuck." The words sent a shiver down Michael's spine. Zeus barked sharply, his growl deepening. Michael's grip tightened on the leash as he stepped back, creating more distance from the door. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Chuck's tone shifted, trying to sound casual, but the underlying menace was clear. "Just wanted to talk, man. No hard feelings from earlier, right?" Michael didn't reply immediately. His mind raced, weighing his options. Zeus, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained poised and alert. The silence stretched, and Michael could feel the weight of Chuck's presence just beyond the door. "You need to leave," Michael finally said, his voice steady but resolute. The murmurs outside grew louder, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps, but Zeus didn't relax. Neither did Michael. Something about the encounter felt unfinished, like a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon. "What is it, Zeus?" Michael asked, more to himself than the dog. The unease in his chest was growing, a gnawing certainty that Chuck wasn't finished with whatever game he was playing. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps broke the quiet. They were muffled, deliberate, circling the perimeter of the apartment building. Zeus let out a sharp bark, his body coiled like a spring. Michael froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He reached for the phone on the counter, his fingers fumbling to dial 911. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, though every nerve in his body screamed otherwise. Zeus moved to stand by the door, his growl low and steady, a warning that reverberated through the small apartment. Michael connected with the emergency dispatcher, his voice shaking as he explained the situation. "There's someone outside my apartment," he said, gripping Zeus's leash tightly as the dog's growls grew louder. "I think they mean trouble." The dispatcher assured him that officers were on their way, but the minutes felt like hours. Outside, the footsteps grew closer, more deliberate. Then came the sound of something scraping against the window pane, a subtle, menacing noise that sent chills down Michael's spine. The scraping stopped abruptly, followed by a muffled curse from outside. Zeus barked again, this time louder, his body pressed against the door as though daring the intruder to come closer. Michael, his grip firm on Zeus's leash, backed into the corner of the room, his mind racing. He felt helpless, reliant on Zeus's instincts and the hope that help would arrive in time. "They're coming, Zeus," he murmured, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Just hold on." Finally, the faint wail of police sirens pierced the tense air. The footsteps outside ceased immediately, followed by the sound of someone running away. Zeus remained on high alert, his growl softening but not disappearing entirely. Michael exhaled shakily, gripping the phone as he whispered into the receiver. "They're here. Thank you. Officers, thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady despite the fear lingering in his chest. "He didn't do anything physical," Michael admitted, gripping Zeus's leash tightly. "But he's unpredictable, and I know he'll come back." One officer knelt down to pet Zeus, though the dog remained on edge, his gaze fixed on the perimeter. "Your dog's instincts are sharp," the officer said. "If he's this agitated, you're right to be cautious." As the officers swept the area, they discovered fresh footprints near Michael's window. They followed the trail but found no sign of Chuck or his friends. "He's probably long gone," one of them said, though their tone didn't inspire confidence. They advised Michael to stay inside, keep his phone close, and call if anything else happened. "We'll increase patrols in the area," the other officer assured him. "But if you feel unsafe, don't hesitate to leave for the night." Michael nodded, though he had no intention of running. This was his home, and he wasn't about to let Chuck take that away from him. "I don't know what's coming next, Zeus," he murmured, "but I know you'll be ready." Zeus's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, and for the first time that evening, his tail gave a faint wag. It was a small moment of reassurance amidst the uncertainty. Michael finally drifted off to sleep, though it was fitful and restless. Zeus, ever vigilant, remained by the door, his body a protective barrier between Michael and the world outside. The bond between them had never felt stronger, forged in the fire of shared fear and trust. "Good morning, buddy," Michael said softly, reaching down to find Zeus's head. The dog immediately stirred, pressing into Michael's touch with a quiet whine that seemed to communicate both affection and lingering concern. "We can't just stay locked up in here forever," Michael said aloud as he filled Zeus's water bowl. "But I'm not sure what to do next." Zeus padded across the kitchen floor, his nails clicking softly against the linoleum. He nudged Michael's hand as if trying to offer reassurance. Michael's phone rang, the automated voice announcing, "Catherine Mills calling." Catherine was the woman from the cafe who had stood up to Chuck. Michael remembered her voice, strong and resolute in the face of Chuck's intimidation. "Hello?" Michael answered, surprised by the call. Michael found himself smiling despite everything. "We're okay. A bit on edge, but okay. Chuck actually showed up at my apartment last night." "What?" Catherine's shock was evident. Did you call the police? Yes, they came, but he was gone by then. They said they'd increase patrols, but... Michael trailed off, the hollow assurance feeling insufficient in the light of day. Listen, Catherine said after a moment of silence. I have a brother who works in security. Would it be all right if I brought him by to check out your apartment? Maybe suggest some additional safety measures. That would be great, actually, Michael finally said. Thank you. They arranged for Catherine and her brother David to stop by that afternoon. After ending the call, Michael reached down to stroke Zeus's head. What do you think, buddy? Are we doing the right thing? Zeus responded with a soft huff, his body finally relaxing slightly, for the first time since the encounter with Chuck. Zeus remained unusually vigilant, patrolling the apartment and pausing frequently by the door or windows, his ears constantly adjusting to catch any unusual sounds from outside. His behavior confirmed what Michael already sensed. The threat wasn't over. At precisely 2 o'clock, a gentle knock sounded at the door. Zeus immediately went on alert, his body tensing as he moved to stand between Michael and the entrance. "Who is it?" Michael called, one hand resting on Zeus's back.
"It's Catherine Mills," came the reply. "With my brother David." Michael approached the door cautiously, Zeus at his side. He unlocked it but kept the chain engaged, opening it just enough to confirm their identities.
"Thank you for coming," he said, as he let them in, relief evident in his voice. "How are you holding up?" Catherine asked gently. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I'm shaken. I've spent years adapting to blindness, learning to navigate the world independently. But this, feeling targeted, hunted, it's a different kind of vulnerability." Catherine's hand briefly touched his arm in a gesture of support. "Nobody should have to deal with that kind of intimidation. But you're not alone, and you have quite the protector there."
At the mention, Zeus shifted closer to Michael, as if acknowledging his role.
"Zeus has been my eyes for 5 years," Michael said, affection clear in his voice. "But yesterday was the first time I've seen his protective training in action." It was David returned to the kitchen, his footsteps measured and deliberate. "Your apartment has some security weaknesses," he began without preamble. "Standard locks, ground floor windows that could be accessed from outside, and a fire escape that provides access to your bathroom window." As they discussed security options, Zeus suddenly lifted his head, his ears perked forward. A low, almost silent growl rumbled in his chest. Michael immediately tensed, recognizing the warning sign. "What is it?" he asked, his hand finding Zeus's collar.
"There's a motorcycle outside," David said, moving swiftly to the window. "Cruising by slowly. Black Harley."
Michael's heart raced. "Chuck?" "Can't tell from here," David replied, his voice dropping into a more tactical tone. "But the rider's definitely checking out your place." Zeus's growl deepened, confirming their suspicions. The motorcycle engine revved loudly before fading into the distance. "He's just testing, watching," David observed. "Trying to intimidate you, see if you're alone." Michael felt a chill run through him. The game Chuck was playing was escalating, becoming more deliberate, more menacing. "I shouldn't have brought you here," he said to Catherine and David. "Now you're involved too." "We were already involved," Catherine replied firmly. "The moment Chuck decided to harass you in public, everyone who witnessed it became involved. That's how community works. We look out for each other." David moved away from the window. "She's right, and I'm going to help you secure this place today. I've got some equipment in my truck." "I can't ask you to do that," Michael protested.
"You didn't ask," David replied simply. "We're offering. Besides, I owe Zeus one for protecting my little sister yesterday."
After they left, Michael moved through the apartment, familiarizing himself with the new security features David had installed. Zeus followed closely, occasionally pressing against Michael's leg in that particular way that communicated his presence and support. "Well, buddy," Michael said, finally settling on the couch. "It looks like we're not in this alone after all." Zeus jumped up beside him, something he rarely did, and rested his head on Michael's lap with a heavy sigh. The wait was comforting, grounding. Michael began to wonder if perhaps Chuck had moved on, finding other targets for his misplaced aggression. The thought brought a mixture of relief and lingering unease, as if expecting a storm that never quite arrived. On the fourth morning, Michael decided it was time to reclaim some normalcy. "What do you think, Zeus? Should we try the cafe again?" Zeus's ears perked up at the familiar word, his tail giving a tentative wag. The German shepherd had always enjoyed their morning ritual, watching the world from their regular table while Michael sipped his coffee. "I'll take that as a yes," Michael smiled, reaching for Zeus's harness.
The April morning was crisp and clear as they made their way along the familiar route to the cafe. Zeus moved with his usual efficient guidance, but Michael noticed a new vigilance in the dog's movements, slight pauses at intersections, more thorough scanning of their surroundings.
"It's okay, buddy," Michael murmured. "We're just getting coffee." The cafe was busy with its usual morning crowd when they arrived. Several regular patrons greeted Michael by name, a few mentioning they had missed seeing him the past few days. The normalcy was reassuring, and Michael felt himself relaxing as they settled at their regular table outside. "Michael?" Maria's voice was low and urgent beside him. "It's those bikers again, 3 of them. They're parking right in front." But the heavy footsteps approaching their table and the sudden tension in Zeus's body told Michael that coffee was the last thing on their visitors' minds. Chuck leaned closer. Michael could smell leather and cigarettes. "See, that's the problem with you. You think you can tell me what to do. You and your dog embarrassed me in front of my friends, and now you think you can just sit here like nothing happened."
Zeus shifted position slightly, moving closer to Michael as Chuck's proximity increased the threat level. The German shepherd's growl was barely audible, but unmistakable to anyone standing close.
"I think your dog is threatening me again," Chuck said, his voice taking on a performative outrage. "I'm just standing here talking, and he's getting aggressive. Maybe someone should report that." "He's protecting me," Michael replied, his patience beginning to fray, "which is exactly what he's trained to do when someone stands over me in a threatening manner." Chuck fell silent for a moment. Then Michael heard the scrape of a chair being pulled out. "Mind if I join you?" Chuck asked, sitting down without waiting for an answer. "I think we need to clear the air." This unexpected move changed the dynamic. Zeus adjusted his position, still alert, but watching carefully as Chuck settled into the chair across from Michael. "Here's the thing," Chuck said, his voice lowered now that they were seated face to face. "I don't like being made to look weak, and your dog made me look weak. That's a problem for me." Michael considered his response carefully. "That wasn't my intention or Zeus's. He was just doing what he's trained to do." "Yeah, he's trained. Real impressive." Chuck's tone shifted, becoming almost conversational. "Tell me something. What happens if something happens to your dog?" "Not saying it would, of course. Just curious how a blind guy manages without his seeing eye dog."
"Good talk," Chuck said, his tone falsely cheerful again. "Enjoy your coffee. Come on, boys, let's give the man some space."
Michael listened as Chuck and his friends moved away, their heavy boots crossing the patio, and then the revving of motorcycle engines as they departed. Only when the sound had faded completely did he allow himself to exhale, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. Zeus remained on high alert, his body still pressed against Michael's leg, as if unwilling to believe the danger had truly passed. "Michael?" Maria's voice came from beside him, concerned. "Are you okay? Should I call someone?" "I'm fine," Michael assured her, though his heart was still racing. "Just need a minute." But as he sat there, trying to calm his nerves with the familiar routine of coffee and conversation, Michael knew that something fundamental had changed. The confrontation had escalated from random bullying to something more targeted, more personal. Chuck's implied threat against Zeus had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Come on, Zeus," Michael said finally, gathering his things. "We need to talk to David." When they reached the apartment, Michael immediately called David, explaining what had happened at the cafe. Michael welcomed them, grateful for the support, but uncertain what they could practically accomplish. First things first, David began once they were all seated in the living room. We need to document everything. Jake's going to help us file a formal police report about the harassment and threats. The more paper trail we create, the better. David leaned forward. We make sure he knows that you're not an isolated, vulnerable target, that you have people watching out for you, people with skills and connections. Make it public, Catherine added. Remember how many people were filming at the cafe during the first confrontation? Most of those videos are probably still on phones, maybe even social media. We find them, compile them, show that his behavior has witnesses, and we establish a visible security presence. Jake continued, I can park my security company vehicle outside for a few days, make it obvious that the property is being monitored. Most guys like Chuck will move on to easier targets when faced with actual resistance. Michael absorbed their suggestions, feeling a tentative hope building. You really think this could work? It's not guaranteed, David acknowledged honestly, but it's our best option short of you relocating, which would mean Chuck wins.
I'm not running, Michael said firmly, his hand finding Zeus's head beside him. This is our home.
Then let's get started, Jake said, pulling out a notepad. I need you to tell me everything, from the first encounter to today, every detail you can remember. As they finished documenting everything, David's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it, then let out a low whistle. What is it? Catherine asked. My buddy who works at the sheriff's department, David explained. I asked him to run a deeper check on our friend Chuck. He looked up, his expression grim. Turns out there's more to his history than just drunk and disorderly. He's got a sealed juvenile record for animal cruelty. Michael felt his blood run cold, his hand instinctively tightening on Zeus's collar. When he was 16, he allegedly poisoned a neighbor's dog after the dog barked at him repeatedly. David continued. The charges were eventually reduced because he was a minor, but it's in the system. We'll keep extra patrols in your area, Ramirez had promised. And we've flagged his name in our system. If he causes trouble anywhere in the district, we'll know about it. You shouldn't have to avoid living your life because of Chuck, she said firmly. Besides, it's been quiet for days. Maybe he's moved on. The cafe welcomed them like old friends, Maria calling out a cheerful greeting as they entered. Usual, Michael? We've missed you the past few days.
Yes, please. Michael smiled, settling at their regular table with Catherine and Zeus.
Then Zeus stiffened, a low growl building in his throat. What is it? Michael asked immediately, his hand finding the dog's harness. Catherine scanned the street, her body tensing. Motorcycle, she said quietly. Just one, stopping across the street. Michael's heart sank. Chuck?
Several tense minutes passed. Catherine provided quiet updates. He's still watching. Now he's on his phone. Still hasn't moved from his bike. While Michael focused on projecting a calm he didn't entirely feel.
Then unexpectedly the sound of a police siren cut through the morning air. Catherine let out a small surprised laugh. A patrol car just pulled up beside him, she narrated for Michael. Officers getting out, talking to Chuck. Chuck looks furious.
Ramirez? Michael asked, hoping it was the officer who had taken their report.
Can't tell from here, Catherine replied. But Chuck is definitely getting a talking to. The officer is pointing in our direction now. Chuck is shaking his head. Now the officer is checking his ID. This feels like a setup, Michael mused. The timing is too perfect.
Maybe Ramirez had someone watching the cafe, Catherine suggested. Or maybe just good luck.
Finally, Catherine reported that Chuck was leaving, the sound of his motorcycle fading down the street. Moments later, footsteps approached their table. Mr. Carter, came a familiar voice. Officer Ramirez. Thought I might find you here. Officer Ramirez, Michael greeted him, extending his hand. Interesting timing. Ramirez chuckled. Not entirely coincidental. After your report, I had a chat with some of the businesses you frequent. Asked them to give us a call if Mr. Darren showed up. Maria's quite a fan of yours. Called the second she spotted that motorcycle.
Thank you, Michael said sincerely. What did you say to him?
Let's just say I made the consequences of continued harassment very clear. Ramirez replied. He's on our radar now. One more incident, and he's looking at charges. Will that stop him? Catherine asked skeptically. Hard to say for sure, Ramirez admitted. But men like Darren typically back down when faced with actual consequences. All the swagger disappears pretty quickly at the thought of jail time. Zeus had relaxed further during this conversation, seeming to recognize Ramirez as an ally. The officer noticed, crouching down to the dog's level. You're doing a good job, boy, he said warmly. Keep watching out for your partner. Sounds like we won, buddy, he said softly. You were right about him from the beginning. I didn't expect to find this kind of community when I moved here, Michael admitted as they shared a meal together. I've always been pretty independent, sometimes to a fault. Independence is important, Catherine agreed, but so is connection. Zeus knew that all along, I think.